The day has done all it needs to do. Now only stillness remains. Let your thoughts loosen like threads unraveling in the dark. What comes next is not to solve or to chase, just a quiet story drifting close. Perhaps it's a voice that remembers you, or a silence that has waited patiently. Let it meet you where you are, and let it lead you gently into rest. The old house on Sycamore Lane stood at the edge of town, its weathered clapboards sagging under the weight of decades. Its windows, clouded with dust, stared blankly at the world, and the townsfolk of Willow Creek passed it with hurried steps, their whispers trailing like leaves in the wind. They called it the Gray House, not for its faded paint, but for the shadow it cast, a shadow that felt heavier than it should. To Clara Hensley, though, it was just a house. A cheap rental, a fresh start, and a roof over her head after a messy divorce that had left her with little more than a suitcase and a stubborn heart. Clara arrived on a crisp October afternoon, her boots crunching on the gravel path as she dragged her belongings to the porch. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, and the sky was a soft gray promising rain. She was 32, with auburn hair tied loosely at her nape and eyes that carried a quiet defiance. The realtor, a nervous woman named Mrs. Tuttle, had handed her the keys with a tight smile and a warning to mind the quirks of the old place. Clara hadn't thought much of it. Old houses creaked, faucets leaked, and floors groaned. She'd lived in worse. Inside, the house was a maze of narrow hallways and dim rooms, the kind of place where sunlight seemed to hesitate at the threshold. The furniture was sparse: an ancient sofa, a wobbly dining table, a brass bed frame, and the upstairs bedroom, but it was enough. Clara unpacked slowly, her hands moving with purpose as she placed books on a shelf and hung a single photograph of her younger self, laughing with her sister on a beach. The memory stung, but she let it linger. She was here to rebuild, not to dwell. As evening fell, the house seemed to settle around her, its creaks and sighs blending with the patter of rain on the roof. Clara lit a candle, its warm glow pushing back the gloom, and made herself a cup of tea. She sat at the kitchen table, listening to the storm, when she heard a soft, deliberate sound from above. A single thump, like a book falling from a shelf, coming from the attic. She froze, her mug halfway to her lips, and waited. The sound didn't repeat, but the silence that followed felt attentive, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Clara wasn't one to scare easily. She'd faced worse than noises in the night courtrooms, late-night arguments, the slow unraveling of a marriage. Setting her mug down, she grabbed a flashlight from her bag and climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor. The air grew cooler as she approached the attic door, a small, unassuming panel at the end of the hall. The knob was cold under her fingers, and it turned with a reluctant squeak. Beyond was a steep set of stairs, swallowed by darkness. She flicked on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the shadows. The attic was a clutter of forgotten things, dusty trunks, a cracked mirror, a dressmaker's dummy tipped against the wall. Cobwebs draped the rafters like lace, and the air smelled of mildew and thyme. Clara stepped forward, her boots scuffing the floorboards, and scanned the space. Nothing seemed out of place. No fallen books, no toppled boxes. Just an empty attic, silent except for the rain drumming outside. "Hello?" she called softly, half expecting an answer, half laughing at herself for it. Her voice echoed faintly, swallowed by the dark. She shook her head, chalking the sound up to the storm or the house's age, and turned to leave. But as she reached the stairs, a faint whisper brushed her ear, not words, not quite, but a sound like breath shaping itself into meaning. She spun around, her flashlight sweeping the attic, but nothing moved. Her pulse quickened, though she told herself it was nothing. Just the wind. Just her imagination. Back in her bedroom, Clara locked the door. Not out of fear, she assured herself, but habit. She climbed into bed, the candle still flickering on her nightstand, and tried to focus on the novel she'd brought. But her eyes kept drifting to the ceiling, where the attic lay just above. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the house grew quiet again. Too quiet. As she turned a page, another sound came, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming lightly on wood, directly above her bed. Clara set the book down, her breath catching. The tapping stopped, replaced by that same attentive silence. She stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. It wasn't fear, not yet, but a nagging curiosity, the kind that pulls at you when you know you should let something go, but can't. She thought of the realtor's warning, the townsfolk's whispers, the way the house seemed to watch her. And then, clear as a bell, she heard it, a voice soft and lilting from the attic. Not words she could make out, but a tone, almost like a song, calling her name. Clara? Her heart thudded. She sat up, clutching the blanket, and listened. The voice didn't come again, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. She wanted to dismiss it, to laugh it off as exhaustion or the strangeness of a new place. But something in that voice, its warmth, its familiarity, made her pause. It wasn't threatening. It was lonely. She lay back down, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, and made a decision. Tomorrow, she'd go back to the attic. Not because she was afraid, but because she needed to know. The house, it seemed, had a story to tell, and Clara, for better or worse, was now part of it. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across Clara's bedroom floor. She woke slowly, her mind tangled in the remnants of a dream she couldn't quite grasp, something about a voice, soft and pleading, echoing through endless halls. The memory of last night's sounds in the attic lingered like a half-forgotten song, and as she sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes, she felt a strange pull toward the ceiling above. Not fear, exactly, but a restless curiosity that made her skin prickle. Clara dressed quickly, pulling on a sweater and jeans, and made her way to the kitchen. The house was quiet now, its nighttime creaks replaced by the gentle hum of morning. She brewed coffee, the rich aroma grounding her, and tried to focus on practical things, unpacking the rest of her boxes, calling her sister to check in, maybe exploring Willow Creek's small downtown. But her thoughts kept drifting to the attic, to that voice calling her name. Had she imagined it? The rational part of her insisted it was the wind or the house settling, or her own exhaustion playing tricks. Yet the way it had felt warm, almost familiar, nagged at her. She sipped her coffee, standing by the window, and watched a pair of sparrows flit through the overgrown garden outside. The gray house felt less oppressive in daylight, more like a tired old place in need of care. Still, Clara couldn't shake the sense that it was watching her, its silence a kind of invitation. She set her mug down and decided to face it head-on. If there was nothing in the attic, she'd prove it to herself and move on. If there was, well, she'd deal with that when she came to it. The attic door creaked as she opened it, the sound louder in the morning stillness. The stairs were steep and narrow, and the air grew cooler as she climbed, carrying the same musty scent of dust and neglect. Her flashlight beam swept the space, revealing the same clutter as before: trunks, a cracked mirror, the dressmaker's dummy leaning like a silent sentinel. Clara stepped forward, her boots stirring faint clouds of dust, and scanned the floorboards for any sign of what might have caused last night's thump. Nothing. Just an empty attic, bathed in the pale light filtering through a small, grimy window. She exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. "See?" she muttered to herself. "Just an old house." But as she turned to leave, her foot caught on something, a small, leather-bound book, half hidden beneath a pile of tattered cloth. She knelt, brushing the dust away, and picked it up. The cover was worn, its edges frayed, and the pages inside were yellowed with age. No title, no author's name, just a faint inscription on the first page in elegant, looping handwriting. "To my dearest, may these words keep you close." Clara's fingers traced the words, her curiosity deepening. She opened the book, expecting a journal or a novel, but found instead a collection of letters, each penned in the same careful hand. "The first began, my love, the nights are colder without you." She skimmed a few lines, her heart catching at the raw emotion in the words, a longing so vivid it felt alive. Whoever had written these had loved fiercely, desperately, and the weight of that love seemed to hum in the air around her. She tucked the book under her arm, intending to read more later, and continued her search. The attic felt different now, less like a void and more like a place with a pulse. She moved toward the far corner, where a heavy trunk sat beneath a drape of cobwebs. The lid was stiff, but it gave way with a groan, revealing a jumble of old clothes, a tarnished silver locket, and a faded photograph. Clara lifted the photograph carefully, her breath catching. It showed a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, with dark hair and a wistful smile, standing in what looked like the garden outside the gray house. The back bore a single name, Eleanor, 1892. Clara's pulse quickened. Eleanor. The name felt heavy, like a key to something she didn't yet understand. She slipped the photograph and locked it into her pocket, her mind racing. Was Eleanor the writer of the letters? Had she lived here, loved here, maybe even died here? The townsfolk's whispers about the gray house came back to her, stories of tragedy, of a woman who'd vanished, of a love that ended in sorrow. Clara had dismissed them as gossip, but now they felt like threads in a tapestry she was just beginning to see. As she closed the trunk, a faint sound came from behind her, a soft, deliberate creak, like a footstep on the floorboards. She froze, her flashlight beam darting across the attic. Nothing moved. The air grew heavy, pressing against her skin, and for a moment, she thought she heard that voice again, not calling her name this time, but humming, low and mournful, like a lullaby from another time. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving only the rustle of wind against the window. Clara stood, her heart thudding, and made her way back to the stairs. She wasn't scared, not exactly, but the attic no longer felt empty. It was as if the house had shared a secret, just a glimpse, and now it was waiting to see what she'd do with it. Back in the kitchen, she spread her finds on the table, the book of letters, the locket, the photograph. The locket wouldn't open, its clasp rusted shut, but the photograph drew her eye again. Eleanor, with her sad, knowing smile. She opened the book of letters and began to read, the words pulling her into a story of forbidden love, a woman named Eleanor, bound by duty and someone she could never have. The letters spoke of stolen moments, of promises made under starlight, of a world that wouldn't let them be. Clara's coffee grew cold as she read, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't know who or what had called her name last night, but she was certain of one thing. Eleanor's story was tied to this house, and it wasn't finished. As the afternoon light faded, Clara looked up at the ceiling, where the attic lay silent above. The house felt closer now, its presence gentle but insistent. She wasn't believing ghosts, not yet, but she couldn't deny the feeling that something was reaching out, asking to be remembered. And Clara, with her stubborn heart and curious mind, wasn't one to turn away. Clara spent the afternoon lost in Eleanor's letters, each page a window into a life that felt both distant and achingly close. The words were heavy with longing, written by a woman caught between duty and desire, her heart tethered to someone whose name was never fully revealed, only initials, J.H., scrawled with a tenderness that made Clara's chest ache. The letters spoke of secret meetings in the garden, of whispers under the sycamore tree, of a love that burned brighter for its fragility. Yet there was a shadow in the words, a sense of time, a running out, of something unspoken looming over them. By the time dusk settled over the gray house, Clara's eyes were tired, but her mind buzzed with questions. Who was J.H.? Why had Eleanor's story been left to gather dust in the attic? And why did the house itself seem so alive with her presence? Clara closed the book, her fingers lingering on the worn leather, and glanced at the photograph on the table. Eleanor's face, with its soft, wistful smile, seemed to watch her back. The locket, still unopened, gleamed faintly in the lamplight, as if guarding its own secrets. She decided to clear her head with a walk. The air outside was cool, the sky a deep indigo streaked with clouds. Willow Creek was quiet, its streets lined with old brick buildings and lampposts flickering to life. Clara wandered toward the town square, hoping to shake the strange weight of the house. She passed a small diner, its windows glowing warmly, and on impulse stepped inside. The smell of fried onions and coffee greeted her, along with the hum of conversation from a handful of locals. At the counter, a woman with graying hair and a name tag reading Doris poured coffee for a regular. Clara slid onto a stool, ordering a slice of pie to justify her presence. Doris, with a face creased by years of smiles, set the plate down and lingered. "You're the one who moved into the gray house, aren't you?" she asked, her tone curious but cautious. Clara nodded, fork pausing mid-bite. "Yeah, just settling in." Doris leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Folks around here talk about that place. Say it's got a history. You hear anything odd yet?" Clara's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Just creaks and groans. Old houses, you know?" Doris studied her, then nodded slowly. "Sure. But that house, it's got stories. Ever hear about Eleanor Gray?" Clara's fork stilled. "Eleanor? I found something with her name in the attic. A photograph." Doris's eyes widened, just for a moment, before she busied herself wiping the counter. Eleanor was the daughter of the house's first owner, back in the 1890s. Beautiful girl, they say, but headstrong. Fell in love with someone she shouldn't have. caused a right scandal. What happened to her? Clara asked, leaning forward. Doris shrugged, but her eyes darted away. Nobody knows for sure. Some say she ran off. Others, well, they say she never left that house. Not really. She paused, then added, "You be careful up there, hun. Old places hold on to things." Clara left the diner with more questions than answers, her pie barely touched. The walk home felt longer, the shadows deeper. The gray house loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the night sky. Inside, the air was cool and still, but the silence felt different, now less empty, more expectant. Clara lit a candle, its flame dancing in the draft, and sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor's letters. She didn't open them, not yet. Instead, she held the locket, her fingers tracing its tarnished edges, willing it to open. It didn't budge. She glanced at the ceiling, half expecting another thump or whisper, but the house was quiet. Too quiet. She stood restless and paced the kitchen, her thoughts circling back to Doris's words. A scandal. A love that wasn't allowed. A woman who might still linger. Clara wasn't one for ghost stories, but the pieces were starting to fit together, and they pointed to the attic. She grabbed her flashlight and climbed the stairs again, her steps slow but deliberate. The attic door opened with its familiar creak, and the air inside was colder than before, sharp against her skin. Her beam swept the room, catching the glint of the cracked mirror, the shadow of the dressmaker's dummy. She moved toward the trunk where she'd found the photograph, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't name. Kneeling, she sifted through its contents again, hoping for another clue. Her fingers brushed something smooth, a small wooden box tucked beneath a pile of faded lace. The box was simple, its lid carved with a single initial, E. Clara opened it, her breath catching. Inside was a delicate handkerchief, embroidered with roses and a single dried flower, its petals brittle but still holding the ghost of a blush. Beneath them lay a folded note, smaller than the letters, its edges worn. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the hurried scrawl. "Meet me tonight, under the sycamore. Whatever happens, know I love you. J.H." Clara's hands trembled as she read it again. The note felt like a pulse, a heartbeat from a century ago, still beating in her hands. She looked up, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but the attic was empty. Or was it? The air seemed to hum, a faint vibration she felt more than heard. And then, soft as a sigh, the voice came again. Not her name this time, but a single word, clear and aching. "Stay." She froze, her flashlight beam trembling. The word hung in the air, not threatening but pleading, as if the house itself were asking her not to leave. Clara's mouth went dry, her mind racing. She wasn't imagining this. Something or someone was here, tied to this house, to Eleanor, to that note. She backed toward the stairs, clutching the box, the note, the locket, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. Back in her bedroom, she locked the door, her breath uneven. She set the box on her knitstand, the candle's light casting long shadows across the room. The house was silent again, but it felt alive, its walls holding a story that was unfolding around her. Clara didn't know what she believed, not yet, but she knew she couldn't walk away. Not from Eleanor, not from the voice, not from the gray house. She lay down, her eyes on the ceiling, and whispered into the dark, "I'm here." The house didn't answer, but she felt it listening. Clara woke to a soft patter of rain against the window, the gray light of morning seeping into her room. The wooden box from the attic sat on her knitstand, its carved E catching her eye as she stirred. Last night's events felt dreamlike. The note from J.H., the whispered word, "stay," the sense that the gray house was more than walls and wood. She reached for the locket, still unopened, and turned it over in her hands. Its stubborn clasp seemed to mock her, holding tight to secrets she was desperate to uncover. She dressed in layers, the house chilly with the damp, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen felt almost ordinary in the daylight, its faded wallpaper and creaky floorboards just part of an old home's charm. Clara brewed tea, the steam curling around her face as she sat with Eleanor's letters. She didn't read them yet, not wanting to rush the story they told. Instead, she unfolded the note from the box again, its hurried words pulling at her. "Meet me tonight, under the sycamore. Whatever happens, know I love you." The sycamore. She glanced out the window where the ancient tree stood in the garden, its branches swaying gently in the rain. Clara decided to explore the garden, hoping it might hold more clues. She pulled on her coat and boots, stepping into the drizzle. The air was crisp, smelling of wet earth and moss, and the garden was a tangle of overgrown roses and ivy. The sycamore loomed at the far end, its gnarled roots breaking through the soil like fingers reaching for something lost. Clara approached it, her boots sinking into the mud, and ran her hand along its rough bark. She imagined Eleanor here, waiting in the moonlight, her heart racing as she stole moments with J.H. The thought made Clara's chest tighten, a mix of sadness and longing she couldn't quite place. She circled the tree, her eyes scanning the ground, and noticed something odd, a small, flat stone, half buried in the dirt. It wasn't like the others scattered around. Its edges were too smooth, too deliberate. She knelt, brushing away the mud, and saw faint carvings, E and J forever. Her breath caught. Eleanor and J.H. had been here, had left this mark, a quiet rebellion against whatever kept them apart. Clara traced the letters, feeling a connection to a woman she'd never met, a story she was only beginning to understand. The rain grew heavier, soaking her hair, and she headed back inside, the stone's image burned into her mind. In the kitchen, she dried off and spread her finds on the table, the locket, the note, the photograph, the letters. She felt like a detective, piecing together a puzzle, but the pieces were emotions, memories, whispers in the dark. She opened the locket again, prying at its clasp with a butter knife, but it refused to yield. Frustrated, she set it down and picked up the photograph, studying Eleanor's face. That wistful smile seemed to say, "Keep looking. Don't stop." Clara's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door, sharp and unexpected. She froze, her heart skipping. She wasn't expecting visitors, and Willow Creek wasn't the kind of place where neighbors dropped by unannounced. She crossed to the door, peering through the small window, and saw a man standing on the porch, his coat slick with rain. He was in his 40s, with dark hair and a kind but weathered face, holding a small package. She opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, his eyes crinkling. "I'm Tom Wheeler from the Historical Society. Mrs. Tuttle mentioned you'd moved in. Thought I'd bring a welcome gift." He held out the package, wrapped in brown paper. "Just some local history pamphlets, a map, that sort of thing." Clara relaxed slightly, taking the package. "Thanks. That's kind of you." Tom glanced past her into the house, his expression shifting to something unreadable. "Settling in okay?" "The gray house, it's got character." Clara nodded, unsure how much to share. "Yeah, it's got stories, that's for sure. I found some things in the attic letters, a photograph. Someone named Eleanor." Tom's smile faltered, just for a second. "Eleanor Gray. She's a bit of a legend around here. Her story's in one of those pamphlets, if you're curious." He paused, then added, "Just be mindful. Old houses can stir things up." Clara thanked him and closed the door, her curiosity piqued. She unwrapped the package, finding a stack of leaflets and a slim booklet titled Willow Creek, a History. She flipped through it, landing on a section about the Gray House. It described Eleanor as the only daughter of a wealthy merchant, promised to a man of status, but rumored to have loved another, a stable hand, no less. The scandal had rocked the town, and Eleanor's fate was unclear. Some said she'd eloped. Others whispered she'd met a darker end. Clara's eyes lingered on the words darker end. She thought of the voice, the whispers, the way the house seemed to breathe with Eleanor's presence. She wasn't ready to believe in ghosts, but she couldn't ignore the pull of the story. She set the booklet down and returned to the attic, driven by a need to know more. The stairs creaked under her weight, the air growing colder as she climbed. Her flashlight swept the space, its beam catching the same familiar clutter. She moved to the dressmaker's dummy, its silhouette eerie in the dim light. Something about it drew her a faint glint at its base. She knelt, finding a small brass key, half hidden in the dust. Her pulse quickened. The locket. She rushed downstairs, grabbing it from the table, and tried the key. The clasp gave way with a soft click, revealing a tiny portrait inside a man with dark eyes and a gentle smile, his face worn but handsome. On the back, in faint ink, J.H. my heart. Clara's breath hitched. J.H. wasn't just initials anymore. He was real, a face, a man Eleanor had loved. She closed the locket, her hands trembling, and felt a shift in the air, a warmth that hadn't been there before. The house was quiet, but it felt content, as if she'd unlocked more than just the locket. She looked up at the ceiling, half expecting the voice, but nothing came. Not yet. She sat back, the locket in her palm, and made a silent promise. She'd find out what happened to Eleanor and J.H. no matter what it took. The gray house wasn't just her home now, it was a keeper of secrets, and Clara was ready to listen. The rain had stopped by midday, leaving the gray house wrapped in a damp, quiet haze. Clara sat at the kitchen table, the locket open in her hand, J.H.'s portrait staring back at her. His eyes held a quiet intensity, a man who loved deeply, but carried a weight he couldn't share. Clara traced the edge of the locket, her thoughts spiraling. Eleanor and J.H. had been real, their love carved into the sycamore, written in hurried notes, whispered in the attic's shadows. But what had torn them apart? And why did the house seem so eager to tell her? She set the locket down and picked up the Historical Society's booklet again, flipping to the section on the gray house. The text was brief, frustratingly vague, but it mentioned a fire in 1893, a minor one that damaged the stable but left the house intact. No one had been hurt, it said, but the scandal of Eleanor's forbidden love had peaked around then. Clara's mind latched onto the stable J.H., the stable hand. Had the fire been an accident or something more? She needed more than pamphlets to understand. Clara decided to visit the town library, hoping for old records or newspapers that might fill in the gaps. She grabbed her coat and the booklet, leaving the locket and letters on the table, their presence too heavy to carry. The walk to Willow Creek's library was short, the air crisp with the scent of wet leaves. The library was a small brick building with ivy creeping up its walls, its interior warm and smelling of old paper. A librarian, a wiry man named Mr. Hargrove, greeted her with a nod, his glasses perched low on his nose. "I'm looking for anything on the Gray house," Clara said, keeping her voice low. "From the 1890s, maybe newspapers or records about Eleanor Gray." Mr. Hargrove's eyebrows lifted slightly. "The Gray house, huh? Folks don't ask about it much anymore. Let me see what we have." He led her to a back room where shelves sagged under the weight of bound newspapers and dusty ledgers. After some searching, he pulled out a box labeled Willow Creek Gazette, 1890 to 1895. This might help. Careful, though these are fragile. Clara thanked him and settled at a table, the box heavy with possibility. She flipped through the brittle pages, scanning headlines about harvests, town fairs, and local politics. Then, in a July 1893 issue, she found a small article tucked on page 3. Fire at Gray Estate Stable. It described a blaze that consumed the stable one night, extinguished before it reached the house. No injuries, but the stable hand, James Hartley, had been dismissed shortly after, suspected of negligence. James Hartley. J.H. Clara's heart raced. She read on, finding another article a month later, Gray Family Scandal. It spoke of Eleanor Gray, betrothed to a merchant's son from a neighboring town, caught in a compromising situation with a servant. The family had hushed it up, but Eleanor had disappeared soon after. Some said she'd run away, others that her father had sent her to a convent. The article was maddeningly short, but it confirmed what Clara had suspected. Eleanor and James's love had been forbidden, and something had broken it. She copied the articles into her notebook, her hands shaking slightly. James Hartley. The name felt like a key, unlocking more of the house's story. She thanked Mr. Hargrove and left the library, her mind buzzing. The walk home was a blur, the town's quiet streets fading as she pieced together the fragments. Eleanor in love with James, a stable hand. A fire, a scandal, a disappearance. And now, a voice in the attic, calling her name. Back at the Gray house, Clara felt its presence more keenly than ever. The air was heavy, not with menace, but with a kind of quiet anticipation. She lit a candle, its flame steady in the still room, and sat with the locket again. She opened it, studying James's face, wondering what he'd been like. Had he waited for Eleanor under the sycamore, as the note promised? Had he left her, or been forced away? The questions burned, and Clara felt a pang of connection, not just to Eleanor, but to the ache of a love that hadn't been allowed to bloom. She climbed to the attic, driven by a need to feel closer to the story. The stairs creaked, the air cool and musty. Her flashlight swept the space, landing on the dressmaker's dummy. She hadn't noticed before, but it wore a faded dress, its fabric delicate and yellowed, the kind Eleanor might have worn. Clara approached, her fingers brushing the sleeve, and felt a faint tremor in the air, like a sigh. She stepped back, her pulse quickening, and heard it again, the voice soft and lilting, not a word but a melody humming through the attic's shadows. "Eleanor?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. The humming stopped, replaced by that attentive silence. She waited, her breath shallow, but nothing came. Still, the air felt alive, as if the house were holding her in its gaze. She moved to the small window, its glass warped and cloudy, and looked out at the garden. The sycamore stood tall, its branches swaying gently, and for a moment, Clara imagined Eleanor there, waiting for James, her heart full of hope and fear. She returned downstairs, her thoughts a tangle of past and present. The house wasn't just a house anymore, it was a keeper of Eleanor's story, and Clara was part of it now. She sat at the kitchen table, opening the letters again, and read one dated just before the fire. "My dearest James, they watch us now, but I don't care. Meet me tomorrow, and we'll plan our escape. Yours always." Clara's throat tightened. They'd planned to run away, but something had gone wrong. As night fell, the house grew quiet, its silence a soft invitation. Clara looked at the ceiling, feeling the attic's pull. She wasn't afraid, not exactly, but she knew she was crossing a line, stepping deeper into a story that wasn't entirely hers. Yet she couldn't stop. Eleanor's voice, James's face, the carved stone under the sycamore, they were calling her, and she had to answer. The gray house seemed to hum with a quiet energy as Clara woke, the morning light soft and diffused through a veil of fog. She lay still for a moment, her eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling, feeling the weight of Eleanor's story pressing closer. The locket, the letters, the carved stone under the sycamore, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. James Hartley, the stable hand, and Eleanor Gray, the merchant's daughter, had planned to run away together. But something had stopped them, a fire, a scandal, a disappearance. Clara needed to know what. She rose, pulling on a sweater, and made her way to the kitchen. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked wood. She brewed coffee, its warmth steadying her, and sat with Eleanor's letters, her fingers lingering on the one about their planned escape. The words were so alive, so full of hope, that Clara could almost feel Eleanor's heartbeat in them. But the hope was laced with desperation, a sense that time was slipping away. Clara closed the book, her gaze drifting to the locket on the table. James's portrait seemed to watch her, his eyes pleading for something she couldn't name. She decided to return to the garden, drawn to the sycamore where Eleanor and James had left their mark. The fog outside was thick, wrapping the world in a soft, gray hush. Clara stepped into the garden, her boots sinking into the damp earth, and approached the tree. The carved stone E and J, forever, was still there, half buried, its edges smoothed by time. She knelt, brushing away a layer of wet leaves, and felt a pang of connection to the lovers who'd stood here, their dreams fragile but fierce. As she stood, something caught her eye, a glint of metal near the tree's roots. She crouched again, digging carefully with her fingers, and unearthed a small rusted tin, its lid sealed tight. Her pulse quickened as she pried it open, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were different from the ones in the attic, smaller and more worn, as if they'd been hidden in haste. The handwriting was James's, less elegant than Eleanor's but steady, each word deliberate. Clara slipped the tin under her arm and hurried back inside, eager to read but wary of the damp. In the kitchen, she untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. It was dated a week before the fire. Eleanor, my heart, they know about us. Your father's men are watching. We must be careful, but I won't let them take you from me. Clara's breath caught. The letters revealed a growing tension: James's fear of discovery, his determination to protect Eleanor, his plans to leave Willow Creek with her. One letter mentioned a meeting with a friend, someone who could help them escape, but it didn't say who. The last letter, dated the night of the fire, was unfinished. If anything happens to me, know I. The words stopped abruptly. The ink smudged as if the pen had been torn away. Clara's hands trembled as she set the letter down. The fire hadn't been an accident, she was sure of it now. Someone had wanted to stop them, to keep Eleanor and James apart. But who? Her father? The man she was promised to? Clara's mind raced, the house's silence pressing in around her. She felt a strange urgency, as if Eleanor herself were urging her to keep digging, to uncover the truth. She decided to visit Tom Wheeler at the Historical Society, hoping he might know more about the fire or James Hartley. She grabbed her coat and the tin of letters, leaving the locket behind, and stepped into the fog. The town felt hushed, its streets empty except for the occasional passerby, their faces blurred in the mist. The Historical Society was in an old church, its stained glass windows glowing faintly. Tom was there, sorting through a box of photographs, and looked up with a warm smile as she entered. "Clara, good to see you," he said, brushing dust from his hands. "Find anything interesting in that booklet?" She nodded, setting the tin on the table. "More than that. I found these in the garden under the sycamore. Letters from James Hartley to Eleanor Gray. They were planning to run away, but something stopped them. I think the fire in 1893 wasn't an accident." Tom's smile faded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That's quite a find. James Hartley was the stable hand, right? The one mentioned in the scandal." He leaned closer, peering at the tin. "Mind if I take a look?" Clara hesitated, then slid the tin toward him. Tom read a few lines, his expression growing serious. "These are personal. You're sure you found them under the sycamore?" "Right by a stone carved with their initials," she said. "Tom, do you know anything else about the fire? Or why Eleanor disappeared?" He leaned back, rubbing his chin. "Not much more than what's in the records. The fire was blamed on Hartley carelessness, they said. He was let go, and Eleanor vanished soon after. Some folks thought she ran off to find him, but there's no proof. Others said her father locked her away to save face." He paused, his voice softening. "There's always been talk about the gray house, though. People say it holds on to its past too tightly." Clara thanked him and left, the tin tucked under her arm. The fog was lifting as she walked home, but her thoughts were heavy. The house greeted her with its familiar silence, but it felt different now, less like a home, and more like a witness. She climbed to the attic, driven by an instinct she couldn't explain. The air was cold, the shadows deep, but she felt a presence, subtle but undeniable. She stood by the dressmaker's dummy, its faded dress swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What happened to you?" The air shifted, a faint hum rising around her. like the echo of a song. It wasn't words, not yet, but it felt like an answer, a plea to keep searching. Clara's heart pounded, not with fear but with purpose. She left the attic, the hum fading behind her, and returned to the kitchen. The letters, the locket, the stone, they were all part of Eleanor's story, and Clara was determined to finish it. Clara stood in the kitchen, the 10 of James's letters open before her, their words a quiet storm in her mind. The fog outside had cleared, leaving the gray house bathed in pale sunlight, but the air inside felt heavy, as if the walls were holding their breath. She traced the smudged ink of James's final, unfinished letter, "If anything happens to me, know I," and felt a pang of loss for a man she'd never met. Eleanor and James had been so close to freedom, their love carved into the sycamore, sealed in these letters. Yet something had shattered their plans, and Clara was determined to find out what. She decided to focus on the fire, the turning point in their story. The newspaper had called it an accident, blamed James, but his letters hinted at something darker, eyes watching, threats looming. Clara needed more than whispers in old articles. She thought of the Historical Society again, but Tom's guarded responses made her wary. Instead, she turned to the house itself. If Eleanor's presence lingered, if the voice in the attic was real, maybe the answers were here, hidden in the gray house's bones. She climbed to the attic, her flashlight casting long shadows across the cluttered space. The air was colder than before, sharp with the scent of dust and old wood. Clara moved slowly, her eyes scanning for anything she'd missed. The dressmaker's dummy stood in its corner, its faded dress catching the light, and she paused, drawn to it again. She hadn't noticed before, but the dress had a small tear near the hem, revealing a glimpse of something tucked inside. Her pulse quickened as she knelt, carefully lifting the fabric. Sewn into the lining was a thin, folded paper, yellowed but intact. Clara eased it free, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. It was a single page, written in Eleanor's elegant hand, dated the night of the fire. "James, they know everything. My father's rage is a storm I cannot weather. He speaks of sending me away, but I won't go. Meet me at midnight by the stable. We'll leave tonight or not at all." The words were hurried, the ink blotched in places as if written in a rush. Clara's throat tightened. Eleanor had been desperate, ready to risk everything. But the fire had come first. She tucked the note into her pocket, her mind racing. The stable was gone, burned to ash over a century ago, but its foundation might still be here, buried in the garden. She hurried downstairs, grabbing a small shovel from a closet, and stepped into the backyard. The sycamore loomed nearby, its branches swaying gently, as if guiding her. Clara scanned the ground, looking for any sign of the old stable. The garden was wild, overgrown with weeds and ivy, but near the edge of the property, she spotted a patch of uneven earth, studded with broken stones. She began to dig, the shovel biting into the soft soil. The work was slow, the ground heavy with years of neglect, but Clara felt driven, as if Eleanor herself were whispering encouragement. After an hour, her shovel hit something solid, a flat, charred piece of wood, part of a beam. She cleared away more dirt, revealing the faint outline of a foundation, its stones blackened by fire. Her heart pounded as she dug deeper, unearthing a small metal box, its surface pitted with rust. It was heavier than the tin she'd found under the sycamore, its lid sealed with a simple latch. Clara pried it open, her fingers trembling. Inside was a bundle of papers, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from the damp. She unfolded them carefully, revealing more letters, some in Eleanor's hand, others in James's. But one stood out, written by someone else, the handwriting sharp and angular. "Hartley, you've gone too far. Leave now, or the next fire will find you both." The note was unsigned, but its threat was clear. Clara's breath caught. This wasn't an accident. Someone had wanted James gone, maybe Eleanor too. She sat back on her heels, the box in her lap, the garden quiet around her. The pieces were coming together, but they raised more questions. Who had written the threat? Eleanor's father? Her betrothed? Someone else in Willow Creek who'd seen their love as a scandal to be stopped. Clara felt a chill, not from the air, but from the weight of the past pressing in. She gathered the box and letters, heading back inside, her boots leaving muddy tracks on the floor. In the kitchen, she spread the new letters on the table, their words a tangle of love and fear. One from Eleanor mentioned a name Margaret, a friend who'd promised to help them escape. Clara's mind snagged on it. Margaret. The Historical Society's booklet hadn't mentioned her, but maybe Tom knew something. She made a mental note to ask, but for now she focused on the house. The attic called to her again, its pull stronger than ever. She climbed the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The attic was dim, the afternoon light barely reaching through the small window. Clara stood by the dressmaker's dummy, the note from Eleanor burning in her pocket. "I'm trying," she whispered, her voice soft in the stillness. "I'm listening." The air shifted, a faint hum rising, like the echo of a sigh. It wasn't words, but it felt like gratitude, a gentle nudge to keep going. Clara's heart swelled, a mix of awe and determination. She left the attic, the hum fading behind her, and returned to the kitchen. The letters, the locket, the threat, they were all part of a story the house wanted told. Clara wasn't sure what she believed anymore, ghosts, memories, or something else, but she knew she was close to something. Eleanor and James's love had been real, and so was their pain. The gray house held their secrets, and Clara was ready to uncover them, one whisper at a time. Clara sat at the kitchen table, the metal box from the garden open before her, its contents spread like a map to a forgotten past. The threatening note, "Leave now, or the next fire will find you both," lay at the center, its sharp handwriting a stark contrast to Eleanor's flowing script and James's steady hand. The words sent a chill through her, not of fear, but of clarity. The fire that destroyed the stable in 1893 had been no accident. Someone had wanted to tear Eleanor and James apart, and they'd succeeded. But who? And what had become of Eleanor after that night? The house was quiet, the afternoon light filtering through the windows in soft golden streaks. Clara felt its presence, not oppressive but attentive, as if it were waiting for her to piece the story together. She reread the letters, searching for clues. Eleanor's mention of Margaret, the friend who'd promised to help them escape, stood out. Clara needed to know who Margaret was. Had she been a confidant, a maid, a neighbor? The Historical Society might have answers, but Tom's guarded demeanor made her hesitant. She decided to dig deeper into the house first, trusting its whispers to guide her. She climbed to the attic, her flashlight casting a steady beam through the dim space. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of dust and time, and the dressmaker's dummy stood in its corner, its faded dress a silent testament to Eleanor's presence. Clara moved toward it, drawn by a hunch. She hadn't checked the dress thoroughly before. Maybe there was more hidden in its folds. She ran her hands along the fabric, feeling for anything unusual, and found a small, stitched pocket near the waist, barely noticeable. Her fingers brushed something hard inside a thin silver hairpin, its tip engraved with a tiny rose. Clara held it up, the metal catching the light. It felt personal, like something Eleanor might have worn, a small piece of her life left behind. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind racing. The hairpin, the letters, the locket, they were all fragments of Eleanor, scattered through the house like breadcrumbs. Clara scanned the attic again, her eyes landing on a stack of crates near the window. They were heavy, covered in cobwebs, but she pulled them apart, her hands stirring clouds of dust. In the last crate, buried under a pile of old linens, she found a small diary, its leather cover cracked but intact. The first page bore Eleanor's name in her familiar script, followed by a date, June 1893. Clara's heart thudded as she opened it, the pages brittle under her fingers. The entries were short, written in bursts of emotion. One read, "Father knows. His eyes are cold, his words sharper. I cannot marry that man, not when my heart is James's." Another, closer to the fire. "Margaret says she can get us passage to Boston. We'll leave after the harvest moon. Oh, James, hold fast." Clara's breath caught. Margaret had been their lifeline, someone trusted enough to plan their escape. But the diary ended abruptly, the final entry dated the night of the fire. "He's coming for us. I hear footsteps in the hall. James, where are you?" The words were scrawled, the ink smudged with what might have been tears. Clara closed the diary, her chest tight. Eleanor had been afraid, not just of discovery, but of something or someone coming for them. She took the diary downstairs, adding it to the growing collection on the kitchen table. The house felt alive now, its silence a gentle hum, as if it approved of her progress. Clara needed to know more about Margaret, but the library's records hadn't mentioned her, and the Historical Society's booklet was silent on her name. She decided to try the diner, hoping Doris might know something. The older woman had a knack for town gossip, and Clara was willing to bet she'd heard stories the records didn't hold. The diner was quiet, just a few regulars nursing coffee at the counter. Doris looked up as Clara entered, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Back for more pie, hon?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Clara slid onto a stool, forcing a smile. "Maybe later. I'm curious about something. Ever hear of a woman named Margaret connected to the Gray house? Maybe a friend of Eleanor Gray's?" Doris's smile faded, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Margaret, hon? That'd be Margaret Poole, I reckon. She was a seamstress, lived in town back in Eleanor's day. Old stories say she was close to the Gray family, maybe even worked for them. Why are you asking?" Clara hesitated, then decided to trust her. "I found some things in the house letters, a diary. Eleanor and James Hartley were planning to run away, and Margaret was helping them. But something went wrong." Doris leaned closer, her voice low. "That's a sad story, all right. Margaret was known for keeping secrets, but she left town not long after Eleanor disappeared. Some said she was heartbroken, others that she was scared off. Nobody knows for sure. She paused, glancing around the diner. You're stirring up old ghosts, Clara. Be careful what you find. Clara thanked her and left, her mind buzzing. Margaret Poole had been their ally, but her sudden departure suggested fear or guilt. Back at the Gray House, Clara felt the weight of the diary in her hands, its final entry echoing in her mind. She sat by the window, watching the sycamore sway in the evening breeze, and whispered, "Eleanor, I'm getting closer." As night fell, the house grew quiet, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. Clara climbed to her bedroom, the diary and hairpin on her knitstand. She lay down, her eyes on the ceiling, and felt a soft hum, like a lullaby, drifting from the attic. It wasn't words, but it carried a warmth, a sense of gratitude. Clara closed her eyes, the hum wrapping around her, and made a silent promise to keep searching, to give Eleanor's story the ending it deserved. The morning light crept through the Gray House's windows, soft and tentative, as if unsure of its welcome. Clara woke with Eleanor's diary still on her knitstand, the silver hairpin glinting beside it. The hum from the attic lingered in her memory, a gentle melody that felt like Eleanor's voice, urging her forward. The pieces of the story letters, locket, diary, and that threatening note were coming together, but gaps remained. Margaret Poole, the seamstress who'd promised to help Eleanor and James escape, was a new thread. Clara needed to know why Margaret had left Willow Creek and what she'd known about the fire that changed everything. She dressed quickly, the air cool against her skin, and made her way to the kitchen. The table was a mosaic of clues: Eleanor's letters, James's tin, the threatening note, the locket with his portrait. Clara's coffee steamed untouched as she reread the diary's final entry. "He's coming for us. I hear footsteps in the hall. James, where are you?" The fear in Eleanor's words was palpable, a desperate plea that echoed in the house's silence. Clara felt a pull to stay close, to let the house guide her, but she needed more than its whispers now. She decided to visit the Historical Society again, hoping Tom Wheeler might know something about Margaret Poole. The walk into town was brisk, the autumn air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves. The Historical Society's old church building stood quiet, its stained glass windows catching the morning sun. Tom was at his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers, and looked up with a cautious smile as Clara entered. "Back so soon?" he said, setting down a pen. "Find more treasures in that house?" Clara nodded, choosing her words carefully. "I did. A diary, Eleanor's, and some letters mentioning Margaret Poole. She was helping Eleanor and James Hartley run away. Do you know anything about her?" Tom's expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Margaret Poole. Yeah, I've heard the name. She was a seamstress, lived on the edge of town. Worked for the Gray family sometimes, making dresses for Eleanor and her mother. She left Willow Creek in a hurry, not long after the fire in '93. Nobody knows why, but folks said she was shaken, like she'd seen something she couldn't unsee." Clara leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "Any chance there are records about her? Maybe where she went?" Tom rubbed his chin, then stood. "Let me check the archives. We've got some old town registries." He disappeared into a back room, returning with a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed and curling. He flipped through it, landing on a page from 1894. "Here's something. Margaret Poole, listed as a seamstress, moved to Boston in late '93. No forwarding address, but there's a note about her selling her shop in a rush. Odd for someone so established. Clara jotted down the details, her mind racing. Boston. The same place Eleanor and James had planned to escape to. Had Margaret gone to find them, or to hide? Anything else about her? Letters maybe, or family? Tom shook his head. Not much. She was a private woman, kept to herself. There's a rumor she left behind a trunk of her things, stored in the old mill before it was torn down. Nobody's seen it in years, though. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. Clara, you're digging deep into this. The gray house? It's got a way of pulling people in. Just be careful. She thanked him and left, the ledger's details swirling in her thoughts. The old mill was gone, but maybe someone in town knew about Margaret's trunk. She headed to the diner, hoping Doris might have heard the rumor. The diner was busier today, filled with the hum of conversation and the clink of dishes. Doris waved her over, pouring coffee before Clara could ask. Back again? Doris said, her eyes twinkling. What's got you so curious this time? Clara slid onto a stool. Margaret Poole. I heard she left a trunk behind when she moved to Boston. Maybe at the old mill. Know anything about it? Doris's smile faded, her hands pausing on the counter. You're deep in it, aren't you? Yeah, I heard about that trunk. Story goes Margaret left in such a hurry she didn't take everything. Some say the trunk had her sewing things, others say it was letters, maybe even money. When the mill was torn down, folks thought it ended up in the town archives, but nobody's bothered to look. She leaned closer, her voice low. Why are you chasing this, Clara? That house giving you trouble? Clara shook her head, offering a small smile. Just curious. It's a good story. Doris didn't look convinced, but she let it go. Clara finished her coffee and headed home, her mind fixed on the archives. The town hall where the archives were stored was her next stop, but for now she needed the house. The gray house greeted her with its familiar silence, the air heavy with that attentive hum. She climbed to the attic, drawn to the dressmaker's dummy, where she'd found the hairpin. It felt like Eleanor's way of guiding her, a quiet nudge toward the truth. She stood by the dummy, its faded dress swaying slightly, though the air was still. Margaret, Clara whispered, testing the name. Did you help them? Or did you run? The attic didn't answer, but the hum grew stronger, a soft melody that wrapped around her like a shawl. It wasn't words, but it felt like encouragement, a sign she was on the right path. Clara returned to the kitchen, spreading out the diary and letters. She reread Eleanor's final entry, the fear in her words cutting deeper now. Margaret had been their hope, but something had gone wrong. Footsteps in the hall, a fire in the stable, a love torn apart. Clara's eyes drifted to the ceiling, where the attic waited. She felt closer to Eleanor than ever, as if the house were weaving their stories together, binding them across time. Tomorrow she'd search the archives for Margaret's trunk. Tonight she'd listen to the house, letting its whispers guide her dreams. The gray house stood silent under a sky heavy with clouds, its weathered walls catching the muted light of late morning. Clara woke with a sense of purpose, Eleanor's diary and the silver hairpin still on her knitstand, their presence grounding her. The hum from the attic lingered in her mind, a soft melody that felt like Eleanor's encouragement, urging her to chase the thread of Margaret Poole. The seamstress's sudden departure to Boston, her abandoned trunk, the rumors of secrets left behind, these were pieces of the puzzle Clara needed to complete Eleanor and James's story. She dressed warmly, the autumn chill seeping through the house, and made her way to the kitchen. The table was a shrine to the past letters, locket, diary, and the threatening note that had turned her suspicions into certainty. Someone had wanted Eleanor and James apart, and Margaret might have known who. Clara sipped her coffee, her eyes drifting to the sycamore outside, its branches swaying as if beckoning her to keep searching. Today she'd visit the town hall archives, hoping to find Margaret's trunk or any trace of her story. The town hall was a squat brick building in the heart of Willow Creek, its steps worn smooth by years of footsteps. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and wax, and a clerk named Mrs. Ellison, a woman with sharp eyes and a brisk manner, greeted Clara at the counter. "Looking for something specific?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "Old records, maybe from the 1890s, Clara said, keeping her tone casual. "I heard there might be a trunk from Margaret Poole, a seamstress who left town around 1893. Mrs. Ellison raised an eyebrow but nodded. "We've got boxes from that era in the basement. Things from the old mill, mostly. Nobody's touched them in years, too dusty for most folks' liking. Follow me." She led Clara down a narrow staircase to a dimly lit room, filled with shelves of boxes and crates, their labels faded but legible. After some searching, Mrs. Ellison pointed to a corner. "Anything from the mill would be there. Good luck, you'll need it." Clara thanked her and set to work, pulling boxes from the shelves. Dust clouded the air as she sifted through old ledgers, deeds, and receipts, her hands growing gritty. After an hour, she found a small wooden trunk, its lid marked with a faint M.P. in faded paint. Her heart raced as she opened it, the hinges groaning. Inside was a jumble of fabric scraps, sewing tools, and a small, cloth-bound notebook. Clara lifted the notebook, its pages brittle but intact, and saw Margaret's name on the first page, followed by entries from 18. The notebook wasn't a diary, but a record of Margaret's work orders for dresses, measurements, notes about clients. Tucked between the pages, though, was a single letter, folded tightly and sealed with wax. Clara broke the seal, her fingers trembling, and read, "Margaret, you've done enough. Speak of this to no one or you'll regret it. Leave Willow Creek and don't look back." The handwriting matched the threatening note from the garden, sharp and angular, its tone cold. Clara's breath caught. Margaret had been warned off, just like James. She flipped through the notebook, finding a loose page with a hurried scrawl. "Eleanor came to me tonight, frantic. They're watching her. I promised to help, but I'm afraid. The fire was no accident. Someone set it to keep them apart. I can't stay here." The words confirmed Clara's fears. Margaret had known the truth about the fire, had been part of Eleanor and James's plan, but fear had driven her away. Clara tucked the letter and notebook into her bag, her mind buzzing. The trunk held no more answers, just needles and thread, remnants of a life left behind. Back at the gray house, Clara spread her findings on the kitchen table, the new letter beside the old threat. The pieces were falling into place, but the mystery of Eleanor's fate remained. Had she run away after the fire, or had something worse happened? Clara felt the house's presence, its silence softer now, as if it trusted her to carry the story forward. She climbed to the attic, drawn by that familiar pull, the air cool and heavy with dust. She stood by the dressmaker's dummy, its faded dress a ghostly echo of Eleanor. "I found Margaret's letter," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know someone stopped you. I'm trying to understand." The air shifted, a faint hum rising, like a sigh woven into a melody. It wasn't words, but it felt like acknowledgement, a gentle hand guiding her. Clara's chest tightened, not with fear, but with a sense of connection, as if Eleanor were standing just beyond her sight. She returned downstairs, the hum fading, but its Carla's presence lingering. She sat with the notebook, rereading Margaret's letter. The seamstress had been scared into silence, but she'd left clues behind, breadcrumbs for Clara to follow. The threatening notes pointed to someone powerful, someone who'd known about Eleanor and James's plan. Clara's thoughts turned to Eleanor's father, or perhaps her betrothed men with enough influence to bend a town to their will. As evening fell, the house grew quiet, its shadows long and soft. Clara lit a candle, its flame dancing in the stillness, and looked at the ceiling where the attic waited. The hum came again, faint and fleeting, like a whisper of thanks. Clara felt Eleanor's story wrapping around her, a tapestry of love and loss. She was close now, so close to the truth. Tomorrow she'd dig deeper, maybe confront Tom or Doris with what she'd found. Tonight she'd let the house hold her, its silence a promise that answers were near. The gray house woke to a quiet dawn, its walls bathed in the soft glow of a sun still low on the horizon. Clara stirred, her dreams tangled with whispers and the faint hum of a melody she couldn't place. Margaret's notebook lay open on her knit stand, its hurried words a stark reminder of the truth she was chasing. The fire that tore Eleanor and James apart was no accident, and Margaret Poole had fled Willow Creek to escape the same threat. Clara felt the weight of the story now, not just as a mystery but as a trust passed to her by the house itself. She rose, the floorboards cool under her feet, and dressed in a thick sweater, the autumn air sharp even indoors. Downstairs, the kitchen table was a shrine to Eleanor's life letters, locket, diary, and the two threatening notes, their sharp handwriting a chilling link to the past. Clara brewed tea, its steam curling in the morning light, and studied the notes again. "Leave now, or the next fire will find you both. Speak of this to no one, or you'll regret it." The words pointed to someone with power, someone who'd silenced Margaret and stopped Eleanor and James. Clara's thoughts circled back to Eleanor's father, a wealthy merchant, or her betrothed, a man whose name she still didn't know. She needed to identify the writer of the threats, and the Historical Society was her best lead. Tom Wheeler had been helpful but guarded, and Clara wondered if he knew more than he'd let on. She grabbed Margaret's notebook and the threatening notes, tucking them into her bag, and headed into town. The streets of Willow Creek were quiet, the air crisp with the scent of wood smoke and damp leaves. The Historical Society's old church loomed ahead, its stained glass windows catching the light like fragments of a forgotten story. Tom was sorting through a box of old maps when she arrived, his face breaking into a cautious smile. "Clara, you're becoming a regular," he said, brushing dust from his hands. "What's on your mind today?" She set the notebook on the table, her voice steady. "I found this in the town archives, Margaret Poole's. It confirms she was helping Eleanor and James escape, but someone threatened her into leaving town. She slid the threatening notes toward him. These were sent to James and Margaret. I need to know who wrote them. Maybe Eleanor's father or the man she was supposed to marry. Tom's smile faded as he read the notes, his fingers lingering on the paper. These are troubling, he said, his voice low. Eleanor's father was Samuel Gray, a hard man, protective of his family's name. Her betrothed was Charles Whitmore, a merchant's son from Carsonville. Both had reason to keep Eleanor in line, Samuel for pride, Charles for possession. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. But this handwriting, it's familiar. Let me check something. He disappeared into the back room, returning with a folder of old correspondence. He sifted through it, pulling out a letter dated 1892, written in the same sharp, angular script. This is from Samuel Gray to the town council about a land dispute. The handwriting matches. He slid it toward Clara, his expression grim. If Samuel wrote those threats, he had the means to act on them. He owned half the town back then. Clara's heart thudded. Samuel Gray. Eleanor's own father had threatened James, maybe even set the fire to stop their escape. She thanked Tom, her mind racing, and left the historical society, the letter's weight heavy in her bag. Back at the Gray house, she felt its presence more keenly than ever, a soft hum in the air, like a sigh of recognition. She climbed to the attic, driven by a need to connect with Eleanor, to share what she'd learned. The attic was dim, the air cool and heavy with dust. Clara stood by the dressmaker's dummy, its faded dress a quiet echo of Eleanor's life. She pulled the silver hairpin from her pocket, holding it tightly. Your father, she whispered, her voice trembling. He stopped you, didn't he? I'm so sorry. The air shifted, the hum rising into a gentle melody, not words but a feeling grief. Yes, but also gratitude, as if Eleanor were thanking her for seeing the truth. Clara's eyes stung, her chest tight with the weight of it all. She left the attic, the melody fading behind her, and returned to the kitchen. She spread out the letters, the diary, the threatening notes, and the locket, their story clearer now. Samuel Gray had known about Eleanor and James, had used his power to crush their love. The fire had been his warning, but what had happened to Eleanor after? Had she run, or had Samuel's control gone further? She sat by the window, watching the sycamore sway in the breeze, and felt a pull to the garden. She stepped outside, the air cool against her skin, and approached the tree, its carved stone, E and J, forever a quiet testament to their love. Clara knelt, her fingers tracing the letters, and whispered, I'm almost there, Eleanor. I'll find out what happened. The wind stirred, soft and warm, like a hand brushing her shoulder. As dusk fell, Clara returned inside, the house wrapping her in its gentle silence. She lit a candle, its flame steady in the growing dark, and looked at the ceiling, where the attic waited. The hum came again, faint but clear, a lullaby that felt like Eleanor's voice, guiding her toward the final truth. Clara knew she was close now, so close to understanding Eleanor's fate. Tomorrow she'd search for the last piece, maybe in the house, maybe in the town's whispers. Tonight she'd rest, letting the Gray house hold her in its quiet embrace. The Gray house stood hushed under a sky bruised with clouds, the air thick with the promise of rain. Clara woke with a heaviness in her chest, Eleanor's story woven into her thoughts like a half-remembered dream. The truth about Samuel Gray, Eleanor's father, had settled like dust his threatening notes, his iron grip on his daughter's life, the fire that had shattered her love with James Hartley. But Eleanor's fate remained a shadow, a question the house seemed to beg Clara to answer. She felt the attic's pull, its hum a quiet call to finish what she'd started. She dressed slowly, the morning chill seeping through the floorboards, and made her way to the kitchen. The table was a tapestry of clues letters, locket, diary, the threatening notes, Margaret's notebook, all pointing to a love destroyed by control. Clara's tea steamed untouched as she stared at the locket, James's portrait, gazing back, his eyes full of unspoken promises. She needed to know what happened to Eleanor after the fire. Had she escaped, or had Samuel's wrath kept her here, trapped in the gray house's walls? Clara decided to search the house one last time, trusting its whispers to guide her. She started in the attic, the air cool and heavy with dust. The dressmaker's dummy stood in its corner, its faded dress swaying faintly, as if touched by a breath she couldn't feel. Clara ran her hands along the walls, checking for hidden panels or forgotten niches. Her fingers caught on a loose floorboard near the small window, its edges worn but slightly raised. She knelt, prying it up with her nails, and found a small, cloth-wrapped bundle tucked beneath. Her heart raced as she unwrapped it, revealing a single letter, sealed with wax and addressed to James, my heart. The handwriting was Eleanor's, but shakier, as if written in haste or fear. Clara broke the seal, her hands trembling, and read, "They've taken me to the East Wing, locked the door. Father says I'll leave for the convent tomorrow. I don't know if you're alive, but I pray you are. If you find this, know I loved you to my last breath. Forgive me." The letter was dated the day after the fire, its words a final cry. Clara's throat tightened, her eyes stinging. Eleanor hadn't run away. Samuel had locked her away, sent her to a convent or worse. The East Wing. Clara realized she'd barely explored that part of the house, its door always stuck, its rooms dark and unused. She hurried downstairs, her boots echoing on the creaky steps, and approached the East Wing's door, a heavy oak panel at the end of the hall. She pushed against it, the wood groaning but giving way, revealing a narrow corridor lined with dusty rooms. The air was colder here, the silence deeper, as if the house held its breath. Clara moved through the rooms, her flashlight sweeping over peeling wallpaper and cracked furniture. In the last room, she found a small bed, its frame rusted, and a window boarded shut. On the floor, half hidden under a tattered rug, was a single rose petal, dried but still holding a faint blush. Clara knelt, her fingers brushing it, and felt a surge of grief, not hers, but Eleanor's, as if the house were sharing its pain. She stood, her chest tight, and whispered, "Eleanor, I found you." The air shifted, a soft hum rising, not a melody but a sigh, heavy with release. It wasn't words, but it felt like a thank you, a letting go. Clara's eyes filled with tears, not from fear but from the weight of a story finally told. Eleanor had been here, locked away, her love for James stolen by her father's hand. The convent, the disappearance, it was all a lie to cover Samuel's shame. Clara returned to the kitchen, the letter in her hand, and sat with the weight of it. The house felt different now, lighter, as if Eleanor's truth had lifted a burden. She looked at the sycamore outside, its branches still, and imagined Eleanor and James there, their love carved into its stone. The hum came again, faint but warm, like a final goodbye. Clara knew the story wasn't hers to keep. It belonged to the house, to Eleanor, to the whispers that had called her name. She gathered the letters, the locket, the diary, and placed them in the wooden box from the attic, tucking the rose petal inside. Tomorrow she'd take them to the Historical Society. Let Tom preserve them for Willow Creek to remember. Tonight she'd stay with the house, its silence a gentle cradle. She lit a candle, its flame steady in the dusk, and looked at the ceiling, where the attic lay quiet at last. The gray house had told its story, and Clara had listened. Eleanor's love, her pain, her voice, they were free now, carried on the hum that faded into the night. Not all spirits seek to frighten. Some just wish to be remembered. If their tale lingered with you, let it rest with your breath. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear a whisper in your dreams, maybe it's just the end of the story.